The Tupolev Tu-104 was a Soviet jetliner which terrified the skies. Tonight's story takes us back to the early 1950s, a time where the world stood on the edge of a technological revolution. The jet age had just arrived. In the West, countries like Britain had begun developing their own jets with the de Havilland Comet, the world's first commercial jetliner. At the same time in the United States, Boeing was racing ahead for the 707, promising faster, higher, and longer flights than ever before. But for the USSR, aviation was not just about transport, it was about prestige, power, and proof that the Soviet Union could rival or even succeed the West. The answer that they came up with was the Tu-104 by Tupolev. On paper, it sounded extraordinary. It was a jet-powered aircraft, faster than most Western airliners. It was capable of long-range flight, and it was a symbol of modernity and national pride. But behind that sleek and elegant skin lay a dangerous secret. As a Tupolev Tu-104 wasn't truly designed to carry passengers. It was actually an adopted strategic nuclear bomber, and that decision was going to haunt it for the rest of its life. This is the story of the Tu-104, a story of a plane which was made infamous by its design, its fatal flaws, and the crashes that defined it. And we're going to be looking tonight at why it became one of the most feared airliners ever. Before we do enter the video, I must say guys, if you enjoy, please do leave a like and subscribe. These videos take me a lot of time to create and research, and I don't use AI here, I make them all by myself. If you do enjoy them, the simplest way to show it is just to subscribe to the channel, and maybe leave a like or share the video if you can. Now, the Tu-104 did not begin its life as a civilian aircraft. It was actually derived from the Tupolev Tu-16. This was a twin-engine strategic bomber designed to deliver nuclear weapons at high speed and altitude. This approach allowed the Soviet engineers to build the jetliner quickly, but it also came at a cost. We need to speak about what was reused to really understand the similarities here. The wings were taken almost directly from the bomber. We also saw the engines, which were military turbojets. Then we have much of the flight control and the philosophy, which was retained from the previous model. And then there's the structural priorities, which favoured speed and strength, not comfort or stability, something which is absolutely critical in a commercial jet. The fuselage was widened and modified to carry passengers, but the aircraft's DNA remained ultimately military. This lineage gave the Tu-104 impressive performance. It had high cruising speeds, it was very strong in its climb capability, and it had a very long range for its time. But it also meant that the aircraft inherited all of the characteristics which were never really meant for a civilian operation. Bombers are flown by military crews under strict conditions, often in high altitude and speed situations. On the contrary, passenger aircraft must be stable, forgiving and safe, even when flown imperfectly. From the get-go, this design setup left the Tu-104 with some severe issues. One of them was the poor longitudinal stability that the plane suffered, as the Tu-104 had serious pitch instability. At certain speeds, especially during takeoff, approach and landing, the aircraft could suddenly pitch up or down with little warning. If the nose pitched too high, the aircraft could enter a stall. Unlike most modern jets, recovery was often impossible. Now that was mainly because of its very dangerous stall characteristics, as Western airliners were designed to give pilots a clear warning of a stall, but the Tu-104 was not. Stalls could occur suddenly, and control authority was extremely limited on this jet. Once it stalled, it often entered a deep stall, and in many cases this was very hard, if not impossible, to recover before impact. Pilots often said that this aircraft was flying normally until it wasn't. Another huge issue with the design of this aircraft was its high landing and takeoff speeds. Because it was designed from a bomber, and its wings meant that it needed long runways, approach speeds were unusually high, and minor misjudgments could cause runway overruns. Then there was the fact that the aircraft had very limited redundancy, as passenger aircraft today, for example, are designed to survive multiple failures. The Tu-104 yet again was not. Hydraulic systems lacked redundancy, engine failures created severe control issues, and structural failures often meant a total loss of the aircraft. Small problems could escalate very quickly and fatally. And from its earliest services, warning signs began to appear with the Tu-104, as pilots reported unexpected dives during turns, sudden pitch changes, control stiffness at high speed, and near stall behaviour during routine manoeuvres. The bomber-derived tailplane was particularly problematic, as under certain conditions, structural stress caused partial failures, and aerodynamic loads became unpredictable. A loss of control followed rapidly after these set of circumstances. And unfortunately, between 1956 and the late 1960s, dozens of Tu-104s were lost. Some crashes were blamed on the weather, pilot error, or maybe navigation mistakes, but internal investigations often revealed their deeper design flaws. One of the more infamous crashes involved a state flight carrying high-ranking Soviet officials. On this trip, the aircraft entered an unrecoverable stall on a routine maneuver, and there was no survivors from the crash. Quietly, engineers had to acknowledge what pilots already knew. The Tu-104 was unforgiving, and sometimes deadly, even when flown correctly. So if the Tu-104 was so dangerous, and so bad, and so flawed in its design, why wasn't it grounded? The Tu-104 was a symbol, and it came with political pressure. If the Tu-104 was grounded, it could embarrass the Soviet aviation industry. It would admit inferiority to Western designs, and it would undermine national prestige. Safety concerns were often subordinated to image, so for this reason, only the most experienced pilots were allowed to fly the Tu-104. Training was often intense, with simulated emergencies, strict speed and altitude envelopes, and rigid procedures. These measures did reduce accidents, but certainly did not completely remove them from the situation. At the time, the Soviet Union had no immediate replacement. Until newer designs like the Tu-134 and the Tu-154 arrived, the Tu-104 was the only jetliner available for long-range service. It was dangerous, but it was indispensable, one of the reasons perhaps why it was kept around for so long. There were many critical flaws to the Tu-104, which included its tailplane sensitivity, which, as we discussed, could amplify pitch oscillations, lock the aircraft into a deep stall, and prevent a recovery even with full control input. The wing design was optimized for speed and not lift. It meant that safety margins were narrow, and it meant that abrupt aerodynamic transitions could occur quickly. Then there was the engine placement, which was under the wings. This caused severe pitch changes during asymmetric thrust. It was difficult during engine out handling, and it increased workload during emergencies. And then there were cabin system issues, as there was minimal pressurization redundancy, few stall-safe systems, and structural failures which could affect the entire aircraft. And there were several notable crashes and incidents which cemented the Tu-104's reputation into history. Let's have a look at some of them. Our first story takes us back to 1959. This occurred near Moscow, as a loss of control during low-speed maneuvering meant that nearly everybody on board this flight was killed. In 1960 there was the Aeroflot disaster, as a tailplane failure at altitude caused a stall. No recovery was possible. And then there were some VIP and military losses, as there was multiple crashes involving senior officials in the aviation community. Publicly, these issues were blamed on pilots, but privately engineers knew better. However, lessons were learnt from the Tu-104, as the Tu-104's failures reshaped Soviet aviation. Going forward, it was understood that passenger aircraft require inherent stability. Bomber designs cannot be safely repurposed without major changes. Stall, recovery, and redundancy are a non-negotiable, and pilot skill cannot compensate for design flaws. These lessons influenced aircraft such as the Tu-134 and the Tu-154 going forwards. But despite all of its flaws, the Tu-104 is remembered. It was the first Soviet jetliner. It was a bold but dangerous experiment, and it was a machine that could demand perfection from its crews. It was a deadly beauty. Behind its dangerous facade, the Tu-104 was sleek, elegant, fast, and revolutionary. It was also very unforgiving. It represents an era where ambition raced ahead of understanding, and where engineering brilliance was not enough to protect human lives. The Tu-104 may no longer fly, but its legacy does still. It's a beautiful aircraft, a terrifying one that reminds us of progress without caution, which often comes with a major cost. This is the story of the Tu-104, the first Soviet aircraft. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching all the way till the end. Do you have a story about the Tu-104? What springs to mind when you think of the aircraft? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I'll see you again soon. Goodbye for now.